Hello. I wanted to share an insight that I had from a recent QHHT session that I facilitated, a quantum healing hypnosis technique facilitated session, um, because I thought it was really, really eye opening around the conscious mind, so our conscious brain, versus the subconscious where we want to be in a session. So accessing from the subconscious versus the conscious. And this is something that is important in hypnosis because the conscious brain is what basically runs our conscious thought. So like when we're awake and we're having our conversation, we're consciously having conversation and we're interacting with people. We're aware of what is going on. Our unconscious, subconscious, is what drives our hypnosis session. So we are accessing the subconscious. And that dictates where we want to go in a session because it's the things that we're curious about. It's the places that have our answers. It's the places that we go when we dream. It's the places that kind of talk in signs and symbols and don't really make any logical sense, but there's information there. So in a session, in the trance state, we are accessing from that subconscious. We are in that subconscious. We're in the signs and the symbols. We're in the, purple skies and pigs flying and creatures with multiple legs that don't quite make sense on Earth, but we're like in that space that you kind of just go with it because there's something there. You might not logically know what's there, but you know something's there. So there was a really, really good, clear example of this kind of conscious versus subconscious in a recent session that I facilitated. And that's what I want to share because it was so clear, and the person, when they were kind of trying to navigate around it. And those are the moments when we either pull ourselves out of the trance state or we kind of sink into and surrender to the subconscious. So in the session, this person was in kind of a desert, ancient Egypt type place, and it was a female in the session, female in the lifetime, female in this current lifetime as well, and she was describing her clothing. So we asked the person to describe their clothing, any jewelry that they're wearing, any bags they're carrying, anything that they have with them, any hats, any adornments. So she's describing the clothing, she's describing the cloth, she's describing the belt and the sash that she's wearing. She's describing, she's going up the body. She's describing her skin color and her hair and her the hair color and the hair texture. And then she gets to kind of like this crown that she was wearing on her head. It was a crown of feathers. And she's describing it, just very, very beautifully describing it. And then she stops and says, "This doesn't make sense." So her conscious brain somehow registered that feathers didn't quite register with what she knew to be true in her waking state. So in her studies, in her education, in her training, in her conversations with people, what she knew to be true about this point in time was people wore certain things, people conducted themselves in a certain way, people, had certain, behaviors or patterns or whatever. So she had a preconceived notion about what was going on in this timeline, in this point in time, and her conscious brain was trying to tie what she knew to be true to what she was experiencing in the session. So describing that person who she felt like she was. So the conscious brain was saying, this doesn't make sense. this didn't happen in this region. The clothing makes sense. The headdress doesn't make sense. They didn't have this colored bird. They didn't. So that's going on in the conscious brain, trying to pull away from the subconscious and what the subconscious is just simply delivering. The subconscious was delivering headdress with black feathers. But that didn't make sense to the information that she knew in her kind of present day waking state. So she was doing this dance between what I know to be true consciously waking, but this is what I'm experiencing, and it doesn't quite fit. And you could feel the energy shift, and you could feel her navigating this. Well, this doesn't make sense, but this makes sense, and this is what I know, but this is what I'm wearing, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm perceiving to be wearing, to be true in this lifetime that I'm describing. So, I just kind of calmly said, it's all right what you're describing, just keep describing what you're seeing. It doesn't have to make sense, just go ahead and just describe what you see. And you could tell it took a little minute, a couple seconds, for the conscious brain to kind of say, okay, I'm going to let go. I'm just going to describe what I'm seeing, and I'm going to take a break. Conscious brain's going on break. And this is what we tell people before we get them under and get them in the trance state. We say the conscious brain is going to want to make things wrong and make sense of things and be logical and be analytical, and there's no space for that. But oftentimes we don't have very tangible examples of what that looks like. So when we're under and we start to question things, we don't realize that that's the conscious brain pulling us out of that kind of trance, deep hypnotic state. So for my client, it was very, very much a push-pull, and you could feel the tension between the conscious and the subconscious. And she just wanted to make sense of the black feathers and the headdress, and it just didn't make sense to her in that moment. Now, the reason it didn't make sense came later in the session. Later in the session, we found out the headdress was a gift. So the feathers came from someplace else, which is why it didn't make sense. She was wearing it from her native community because the feathers came from somewhere else. It was a gift from, another land. So there's a reason it didn't make sense, but it took a minute for her to kind of grapple with, this doesn't make sense, but I'm here, and the rest of this makes sense, but I got to go with this. And, so it was just a really, really clear, fascinating example of what happens in a session when the conscious brain wants to take over and wants to make sense of what's happening, but won't surrender to the subconscious and just let the energy flow, let the information flow. So I wanted to share that because, again, clear example. And it's always just nice to have very clear examples when, in particular, something like hypnosis is discussed, because many people say, oh, well, I can't be hypnotized, or, oh, I think I'm doing it incorrectly, or, whatever, or I don't understand what conscious versus subconscious is, or, whatever. So having examples like this is really helpful, just to see it in action or hear specific examples of what it could look like in action. I've also had, immediately when people go under, they have an expectation of, I'm going to be completely unaware, I'm going to be completely asleep and not knowing what's going on. And then when they have awareness of their surroundings, they are surprised because they're not completely zonked out. I've also had where people go under and they're expecting, big bright lights and big, dropping into some extravagant lifetime, and you kind of get like darkness or blackness, or you don't really get anything. And immediately the conscious brain wants to say, oh, I'm doing this wrong, and then pulls the person out. And then it's like, no, you're not. There's no right or wrong. It's just, what are you seeing? What are you perceiving? What are you, what is the experience? And just talking about what you're experiencing. And then we end up getting, whatever the information that is necessary. So the conscious brain is what we want to take a back seat. We want the conscious brain to take a break, to take a nap when we are in session, because the subconscious is what leads the way. And if you have any experience with hypnosis or meditation or any other sort of kind of trance-like state, then you might have awareness of what this kind of grappling between the back and forth is. It's a really interesting space to be in, because you feel yourself having this battle, this internal battle of, is this it? Is this it? Is this wrong? Is this right? Is this, and you're trying to like hold on to something that feels real, so you can label it, feel comfortable with it, and then move on. But the labeling of it and the comfortable with it might actually keep you from getting to where you need to be. I'll say need to be in air quotes, because need is relative. But yeah, conscious versus subconscious and hypnosis. So that's my roundabout way of giving an example of real life, what happened in a session, and just the client's experience with kind of that push-pull of, this doesn't make sense. I don't know why it doesn't make sense, but I feel like I have to go with it, so I'm just going to go with it. So I hope that helps, just with a real life example. And if you'd like more examples, just let me know. I have plenty of them. So I hope that helps.